America and other free and open societies face crucial challenges and opportunities abroad that affect security and prosperity at home. This is a series of conversations with guests who bring deep understanding of today's battlegrounds and creative ideas about how to compete, overcome challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and secure a better future. I am H.R. McMaster. This is Battlegrounds.
On today's episode of Battlegrounds, our focus is on Europe and the country of France, America's oldest ally. Our guest, Philippe Etienne, is a French diplomat currently serving as the French ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Etienne joined the French Senior Civil Service in 1980 and has served as ambassador to Germany and Romania, as well as permanent representative to the European Union and diplomatic advisor to the President, the equivalent of the U.S. National Security Advisor from 2017 through 2019. He is a polyglot and expert on the European Union. France's long alliance with America began during the American Revolution. France provided troops, armament, naval power, and money that proved critical to secure the Continental Army's ultimate victory. France and the newly independent United States established diplomatic relations in 1778. However, King Louis XVI's ambitious spending at home and in the American colonies brought France close to bankruptcy. In 1789, financial hardship combined with meager food supplies elicited mass protests known as the French Revolution, which abolished France's absolute monarchy and feudal system. Soon after the turn of the century, Napoleon Bonaparte sold the French territory of Louisiana to President Thomas Jefferson for $15 million, effectively doubling the size of the United States. The Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 brought large swaths of Europe under French rule and diffused liberal French ideals throughout the continent, including due process of law and the elimination of feudalism. Educational and cultural exchanges characterized the largely friendly U.S.-France relationship through the following century, as evidenced by the 1884 gift of the Statue of Liberty from the people of France to the people of the United States. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I to support France and the Triple Entente. During World War II, the U.S. ended relations with the Vichy government when Germany occupied all of France and supported General Charles de Gaulle's Free France forces and government in exile. The two countries normalized relations at the end of the war, and the United States provided significant aid to Europe through the Marshall Plan. The U.S. and France became formal allies through NATO in 1949 and enhanced trade and security cooperation during the Cold War, even as they disagreed on elements of French decolonization and the Suez Crisis of 1956. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, France joined many European nations in alliances that worked to unify the continent. In 1992, the Single European Act created a common market, and the Maastricht Treaty established the European Union. France and other European nations formed the Eurozone in 1999 in the hope that a shared currency would provide increased growth and security in Europe. Despite the French withdrawal from NATO's integrated military structure from 1966 to 2009, France has been a strong political ally within NATO, and France contributed to NATO operations in Bosnia in 1993 to 1994, and in the 1999 air campaign aimed to end mass atrocities against civilians in Kosovo. As a permanent member on the United Nations Security Council, France has been an invaluable partner in combating terrorism in South Asia and the Greater Middle East, and in combating domestic terrorism in Europe, while showing resilience in the face of horrific attacks. We welcome Ambassador Etienne as France faces challenges of energy security, the European Union's recovery from COVID-19, complex intra-EU relations, sustained counter-terrorism efforts in the G5 Sahel region of West Africa, and competitions between authoritarianism and democracy.
Ambassador Etienne, bienvenue. Welcome to Battlegrounds. Let me begin by saying what an honor it was to serve with you and to work with you on some of the issues we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Battlegrounds.
Well, thank you very much, H.I. It's a pleasure for me, really a pleasure, because it was such a great honor, but also so important for me to work with you, as we were the two of us national security advisor for the US and in France. And I will never forget a cooperation and my visit to Washington the first time, and everything we have done together. And as a French ambassador, one of my the big events at the beginning of our mission was my visit to the Hoover Institution and to you in Stanford. So thank you very much for having me on Battlegrounds.
Well, thanks, Philippe. I think it's very fortunate for France to have you as the ambassador to the United States, and of course very fortunate for us as well. And we have a lot to talk about, Philippe. So I'll just dive right into it. I think both of us were very concerned about NATO in our time as national security advisors, and the importance both to reform NATO and strengthen NATO at a time when there were some very significant security threats to the east from Russia, and to the south with the migration crisis centered on the catastrophe of the Syrian civil war. President Macron has he's been critical of NATO, which frankly I've welcomed, right? Because I think that we need to provide impetus for reform and strengthening the alliance. What's your assessment of the alliance today? What do you see as the biggest threats, and is NATO up to it?
Well, indeed, NATO remains absolutely critical institution, the bedrock of our collective security, and not only because of the traditional challenges, not only because of the rise of China, but also because there are new challenges, which are horizontal challenges: cybersecurity, the security in the outer space, and information wars. And so we need more than ever this collective alliance. But as you said, at one point, my president has expressed some critics, is quite in strong terms.
Well, I think it was the brain death of NATO, Philippe.
Yeah, the brain dead, yes. Concerning not the military dimension, but the political dimension of this, of the way NATO was functioning. It was just before the NATO summit in London in December 2019. And why did he say that? After what? What was the motivation? Well, you remember, and maybe we will come back to this later, but just before, we had the military intervention of Turkey in the northeast of Syria, and this intervention was targeted the people with whom we fought together against Daesh, what we call Daesh, what you call ISIS. So it was a bit strange and quite frankly problematic to have one of the most important allies inside NATO against our allies against terrorist organizations which have attacked France, especially plotting their attacks against France in 2015 from northeastern Syria. And then we had also, obviously, with the previous US administration, some decisions which have been taken without really consulting allies also. So a general issue of both a lack of consulting among allies, but also a lack of common vision about who is our enemy today. What are we here together for? So this was the outset of a very positive process, because our leaders of the NATO nations decided in London to launch an exercise to task a group of independent wise persons, which was headed by Wes Mitchell and the former German minister Thomas de Maizière, to which former French minister Hubert Védrine took part, and they have given quite a good report recently. So now we have a new thinking, which a solid base, which is the report of this group of experts to look at the NATO in the coming years. And we are, as France, very much committed to this, and we welcome also the US recommitting clearly now to NATO, to Article 5. So this goes into the right direction. And I think also that something positive in this, but we might come back to this, is that the European Union also as such has been changing in the recent years. And the EU is more and more a very important partner for NATO. So this is a state of affairs. I think we were right to criticize some aspects of NATO, maybe in very strong terms. And I think things have moved rather positively since then.
Well, thank you, Philippe. I'd like to talk more about the European Union, but first, can we talk about Turkey a little bit? I'm concerned about Turkey, and I think that you are, and many of our friends are, because I think Turkey is drifting away. I think it's safe to say from the West, and I think if this drift continues, it could be the largest geostrategic shift since the end of the Cold War, and it would be against us. And some of the causes of concern you've already mentioned, but there's also really this idea that Turkey is using refugees as almost a way to threaten Europe. We had the contention in the Eastern Mediterranean, territorial disputes within NATO between Turkey and Greece, and the Turks becoming aggressive there. We have Turkish proxy forces, supported militias fighting from Libya into across to Azerbaijan, as well as the intervention into eastern Syria that you mentioned, and they're buying S-400 missiles, from Russia, and so there are some significant causes for concern with President Erdogan's policies. How do you assess the relationship, and what's your prognosis? Maybe more importantly, do you think we'll be able to convince Turkey that its interests really do align with the United States and Europe and NATO countries more than they do with, for example, Russia and Iran?
Wow, thank you. This is a really important question for the future. I cannot guess what the future will be, of course, but I will give you my own view on this, considering our recent experience. You've mentioned both the fact that Turkey is a key partner, not only in NATO for the United States and the other allies inside NATO, but also for the European Union, because Turkey is a very important, very powerful country, which is a neighbor of the European Union, with our own history of a very close relation with Turkey. And Turkey is a key partner for security matters, but also, as you said, because of the migration policy, which is a big challenge for all of us, including for Turkey. And so we need a very close cooperation. While in the recent years we have been we have seen a lot of the build-up of a lot of concerns, I will not repeat them because you have mentioned all of them. But one of the most, I will only mention one of them you have mentioned already, which was the aggressivity of Turkey towards Greece, and also with the Cyprus question, which remains not unresolved. So in Eastern Mediterranean in general, we were very much worried. It's true that recently, in the last weeks, we have seen a much more positive tone in the statements by the Turkish government and also the Turkish president, while some months ago President Erdogan was very, very aggressive against even our country. We had even words about a boycott of French products, and because of the situation with Islam. And so we were really concerned. And recently it has moved, the statements have moved more to positive approach, and we welcome this, of course. Of course, it must not be only about words, it must be also about actions, deeds. So we will see. But we have accepted, of course, gladly to restart the discussions with Turkey at all levels, presidents' levels, but also governments, foreign ministers. So we need really to, and this question is related to the question before, to see, and I hope we can do this, come to common visions as NATO allies about what we want to do as NATO allies, what are our priorities. And I think this is being discussed now with the new US administration, both the the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense came to Brussels to discuss with their allies about the challenges such as Afghanistan. Turkey is a very important player for all of these, these new and other challenges we discussed before on NATO. So we will take it seriously, but we will expect positive actions from our Turkish ally, and we will try on the French and EU side, of course, to contribute to this. But we will remain very firm when it's about, for instance, the attitude towards Greece or in other fields. We can come back to Syria, to Libya. We will remain, of course, very firm, but we will encourage a positive development, including the discussions between Greece and Turkey.
Thanks, Philippe. I think what's going to be important is how politics inside of Turkey evolve as well, with President Erdogan and his wing of the AKP, which of course is just now outlawed the only Kurdish party as well, which doesn't make any sense. It seems as if they're almost trying to cultivate an internal security problem with those sorts of decisions. So I agree with you that this is something that we have to pay attention to and try to accentuate the positive while being clear about what we can accept. But of course, the country that loves any kind of arguments within the family of NATO is Russia. And Russia has been for many years engaged in a sustained campaign of political subversion against countries in Europe. Russia attacked our elections, attacked your election. And really what they hope to do, I think, Philippe, is to polarize our populations and pit us against each other on hot topic issues. In the United States, it's race and immigration and gun control, but they also want to break apart the European Union and NATO and sow dissension between our countries and dissension really in connection with the transatlantic alliance. How do you assess Russia's actions, especially what some people have called Russian new generation warfare, or its sustained campaign of cyber-enabled information warfare against us? And how concerned are you about what appears to be more and more aggressive posture vis-a-vis Ukraine now, as they're massing forces there and engaged in clearly a campaign of coercion, but also it looks like preparations for maybe a further invasion of Ukraine?
Well, of course, we have been obliged to express our, including collectively recently, for instance, a G7 statement of our foreign ministers, very clearly not only our deep concern, but our full support to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders, which is a mention of Crimea, because we have never recognize the annexation of Crimea, of course. And, France and Germany together try to mediate to find solutions after the Minsk agreements, at least to the conflict in Donbass in eastern Ukraine. We will continue to do this. We are committed to do this. There were ups and downs, but we had not yet had, in terms of ceasefire. Now we are really in a negative, in a worrying situation with the buildup of these forces, the Russian forces at the border with Ukraine and in Crimea also. So we will continue still to work for a breakthrough in looking for a political solution in the Donbass conflict based on the Minsk agreements. But we must recognize also that Russia is more and more using new instruments also. And you mentioned the interference in our elections, because of course it's well known what happened in May 2017 and in France. And I have seen also the report about not only elections in 2016, but also now in 2020 by Russia. And as you say, that there are these new instruments, some new generations, new actors who try to use internet and social media to sow division inside our society, and not necessarily to create those divisions, because they do exist. We must be frank, and they do exist without their intervention, but to aggravate them, to put, as we say, oil on the fire in French, and to make them still bigger, and because indeed the clear objective is to weaken both our societies from inside, but also our relations. You mentioned NATO, and again, we have here, for instance, the example you mentioned with S-400 bought by Turkey from Russia, but we see also a pattern of cooperations in Libya, although in Libya the two countries support different camps, but we see the risk of permanent foreign military presence on our southern borders as Europeans in this very important country, Libya, which is not really our interest, and which we want to avoid. And finally, we have this also a cyber security issue, not only in our democracy, but also our economic interests and our security interests, our critical infrastructures, energy, healthcare. It's more and more sensitive, and we must really take it more than seriously. As far as the EU is concerned, we have, especially after what happened with Ukraine, we have succeeded to keep our unity on Russian policies. It is not easy, because we have different traditions, but also different histories of different European countries who have their views. It's normal, it's legitimate, informed by their own history towards Russia. And but we, together with Germany, we have always insisted on being very consistent, and as EU, because otherwise, as you said, HR, it's also very tempting, and they try to do that to divide us. And one good example where we are very firm together is the use by Russia of chemical weapons and against their opponents. When the UK was still a member of the EU, we had the Skripal attack in Salisbury, where we stood absolutely firmly all together, but also recently Navalny poisoning, and with Germany also, France took a very firm stance. So we have some issues like cybersecurity and the use of chemical weapons, but also Ukraine, which we took very seriously. While of course Russia being also a neighbor and absolutely essential for some files, Iran or Syria or others, or Afghanistan, or more generally for the security of the European continent. Of course, we have to discuss with Russia, and this is the meaning of the dialogue which my president has relaunched with the Russian interlocutors and with President Putin. So it's this combination which we want to find, and I think we have found it in the recent years.
You know, Philippe, it's easy for us to focus on the problems, right? Because that's always what's in the news. And when you look at the European Union, it is a tremendous achievement, right? In terms of the vision of a Europe that was united and free. And I'm reminded of, I think Churchill said at the end of World War II, he said that Europe was a rubble heap, a charnel house, a breeding ground for pestilence and hate. And he talked about, really in the wake of these two destructive world wars, horrible world wars, that Europe would continue to be predicted, as states animated by, I think, ancient nationalistic feuds, right? So, when we look in the broader sweep of history, at least going back to the early 20th century, I think we should be encouraged, right, by what the EU has accomplished. But there are problems today, Philippe, in connection with this tension between the desire for unity in Europe and national sovereignty, and citizens' unwillingness to give up their sovereignty to what some people see as faceless bureaucrats in Brussels, right? You have Brexit, which was a manifestation of those concerns in the UK. And of course, there are tensions between East and West and North and South. And there are some countries, such as Hungary, which is moving in a very nativist kind of direction, in a way that doesn't seem very consistent with European values and principles overall. So, could you describe how you view some of those tensions within the EU, and what your recommendations are to try to overcome those or allay those tensions?
Well, first, thank you for having mentioned that the EU, the European integration is an incredible success story. I remember having listened to your conversation with Christoph Heusgen, our common friend. So I will only repeat what he said about the wars between France and Germany and how our leaders, after World War II, have drawn the lessons of history and have launched this historical reconciliation process between France and Germany, which is frankly a model, and it has been working. The EU as a peace process, has been heavily supported by the United States, of course, after World War II. And this long period of peace and the stop of making wars or even political competitions between our countries, as we did before World War II, and to replace it with this unique, historical, unique integration process, which is now the European Union, is really very important and positive. And we mean it very seriously. We have grown through the crisis, including the financial crisis from 2008, which lasted until 2012, actually. We have grown through the refugee crisis, although it's a very difficult issue. And we have grown through the pandemics, through the COVID crisis. Last year, President Macron and Chancellor Merkel proposed that the EU, for the first time, and it was accepted and proposed formally by the EU institutions and accepted by all leaders of the EU nations, that the EU takes debt, borrow money on the financial market on behalf of the EU collectively. It's the first time. It's what I think the German finance minister called the Hamiltonian moment of the European Union. So the EU grows and gets stronger, especially through the crisis, which are moments where we realize our nations are too fragile, too small. Even the most important EU countries, such as Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, we realize we're not we cannot be efficient facing our common challenges alone, and we have the same interests, the same values. So it's really very important. Obviously, there are some differences of views, including on our basic values, because we have built this union as a union of democracies. And when Spain and Portugal or Greece or Central European countries became members of the EU, it was at times when they had free democracies and they wanted to consolidate those democracies. So these democratic values are a core of our integration. And what you say about Hungary is correct. We have to discuss frankly, candidly, among our countries, and also at the level of the European Parliament and the level of the European Court of Justice in some cases, about the disagreements we can have, because we want to preserve this democratic heritage as a base of our current and future integration. So we have challenges. We have challenges on all fronts, but I think that it's good news for the United States, which has contributed so much to the peace on the European continent and security, and which has encouraged the beginning of this incredible adventure, which is the European integration. It is a very positive and for the US if we succeed in overcoming these difficulties. And you mentioned the mistrust of people towards Brussels, but I would answer, there is also probably a mistrust of your citizens towards Washington. And It's not on it's a broader issue, I think, than only the EU. It's we have this also at the level of the French democracy. You know, we had the Yellow Vests movement. In all our democracies, we have to reinvent our democratic to preserve our democracy and to make it to adapt it to the new the digital age, and to recognize when inequalities have grown, which is the situation in most of our countries, and to fight against those inequalities. And finally, we have elections regularly, free elections, and people can decide. But I think what people want on the top of our traditional democratic institutions, it's also a new form of decision taking, of consulting the people about the decisions, which are of a decision taking being closer to the people. And we have had in France very interesting experiences after the Yellow Vest movement. We had a national debate. Recently, we have created a body of citizens which have been selected by draw to advise and to make proposals on the energy and climate transition. I think we will see more and more of this also at the EU level. We will not continue to reform the European Union by treaties negotiated behind closed doors. More and more, we want to associate people so that they understand, and I think they do understand, the principle of being together, stronger together. But what they want us to see is whether they are associated to the discussions and whether we have results in the big challenges. So my answer is a rather optimist one, while I acknowledge that you're right to point to real issues and to real debates inside the EU.
Well, Philippe, I think the point that you make that in a democracy, the strength is that we have a say in how we're governed, and the American people, the French people, European people, I think, have to have confidence that their voices are being heard and the government's responsive. And of course, Russia, as you mentioned, is quite active in exacerbating any of those doubts about our democratic institutions and processes. So maybe the specter of a foreign competitor can help bring us together. And maybe we could begin to talk about China a little bit and the EU and the concerns that many Americans have about the EU because the EU seems to be at times a competitor in trade and in economic discourse and commerce. And there are grave concerns, in the United States during the Trump administration in particular, but they still remain among many Americans about unequal access to the European market, for example, and lack of reciprocal trade arrangements. And there are also concerns these days, Philippe, about this term strategic autonomy. It sounds like our friends are leaving us and are playing us against maybe China for their own advantage and at our expense. So this is a significant concern. Could you maybe explain what your view is of the transatlantic relationship with the EU in particular, and then also can you explain this disturbing term for many of us in the United States of strategic autonomy?
Well, strategic autonomy is, for me, related to another concept we have been developing in the last years, which is the concept of European common sovereignty. European sovereignty means what I tried to explain before, which is that we are stronger together. We realize we are sovereign nations, no doubt of this. We are France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, and so on, all members of the EU. We remain sovereign nations, but we have to pool our sovereignty together. Because, as I said before, in the world as it is, especially if you think of the rise of China, we need to defend the interests of our middle class, of our working people, of our citizens more broadly, and to efficiently defend those interests. We have to, and because we are stronger together, we have to build our common sovereignty in the world as it is evolving. Two examples concerning China. We have more and more insisted on an agenda of reciprocity in the access to economic markets, but also on other in other domains. The principle of reciprocity is really important. We have also introduced a screening of foreign investments, which was really useful after what China has started to do. Benefiting from the financial crisis in 2008, they have acquired a lot of infrastructures, for instance, in Southern Europe. And we have started to build a common EU instrument for screening foreign investment in strategic domains. So this is the meaning of what we try to do. And in this concept, security and defense are not the only domain, but are a very important domain. As I said, we have developed our budgets for defense, both nationally, and we have even started to build a EU budget for to increase our military capacities. And it's all about reinforcing also NATO, our transatlantic alliance. So when we speak about autonomic strategy, it means to be able to do, especially in our neighborhood, things that the US in particular are our principal ally, and you know that France considers itself as the oldest ally of the US. For us, this alliance is really important, not only as NATO, but also it's our national history. We understand that the United States needs to redeploy certain capacities. In the world as it is today, the US will continue to be more and more active in the Indo-Pacific area, and we have listened to the US calling us to be more able to do some things without always needing US military leadership. So to get our act together, to be able not only to spend more money, but to have the political will and the capacity to engage troops abroad. You know, we have still many progress to do. I think that France has shown what it can be done in Sahel. Maybe we will discuss this later. We still need the American support, but at least the battleground here is not a battleground where you have American boots on the ground. The US knows there is an allies which can do the job on the ground, and it will support it, because the US cannot lead anywhere, and we have the same also the new priority. And finally, I think that the US can also take comfort, speaking about autonomic strategy and sovereignty, in the fact that we have developed, France has been the first one to develop in Europe our own Indo-Pacific strategies. France being there in the Indian Ocean and Pacific Oceans. We have territories, we have citizens, we have forces. We have been the first European country to present our own Indo-Pacific strategy in 2018. Germany has followed. Now we discuss about the EU. So it shows that these ideas, these orientations, which we call we give these words, it's a good thing for the US. It means a more able ally, which will take more on a bigger share of the burden on its shoulders. And maybe we should better explain what we want, but the reality is that.
Yeah, I think, Philippe, that probably the relationship between the United States and the EU, and then I would add the world's other largest economies, Japan foremost among them, have to work together to confront various forms of Chinese aggression, especially Chinese economic aggression. And one of the causes of concern, I think, in the United States was this, I think we would agree, ill-timed, at the very least, comprehensive agreement on investment with China at the very moment when the range of China's internal egregious human rights violations and the slow campaign of slow genocide in Xinjiang, the doubling down on the repression of Hong Kong, this apparent race to perfect its Orwellian surveillance police state internally, as well as the aggressive external actions, what's happening in the South China Sea now with 200 of these boats, right, they're trying to affect the largest land grab in history, the threats to Taiwan, the Senkakus, the bludgeoning of Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, and a campaign of of economic coercion aimed at Australia. What's your assessment of this comprehensive agreement on investment? It seems to me it's based on the same false promises that China made when it entered the WTO in 2001.
Well, yeah, I know HR, we have this discussion with our American friends, but the US itself has signed this bilateral phase one trade agreement with China 1 year ago. And the Asian allies, our Asian allies, have also adhered to a free trade agreement with China not later than last fall, I think. Our ECPs, I think, is the name of the agreement. So to be fair, this comprehensive agreement on investment, which had been negotiated for 7 years and which is not yet legally established, it has been a political conclusion at the end of last year. It's when you look at it, it's compared with the two other agreements I mentioned, which is the US and Asian allies have concluded with China, is maybe something which has some added value. If you look at the commitments the Chinese took in the effort to ratify the ILO conventions against forced labor, which is very close to what you said about human rights, or in terms of reciprocity and access to market, which with provisions which would be benefit to not only to our European companies, if the CAI is implemented, it will also benefit to your companies or to other companies in the world. So I think it is a bit unfair to criticize us, but it's a discussion which we are happy to have, and I completely accept, and not only accept it, we have been saying this years and years, and especially when we had the Trump administration, and we worked together in this period. We told the US that we are more than willing. We want to work with the US, especially inside the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to reform this organization, because China now, you mentioned it's China becoming a member of the WTO and making promises and so on. We accept the fact that the rules are not fair, that there are hidden public subsidies to Chinese companies, even to private Chinese companies. Very often, we see that China has a large activity now in Africa and owns ever bigger share of national debts from developing countries. We want to call China to take its responsibilities also in terms of as G20 member, as a big owner of debts taken by other countries toward China or toward Chinese corporations. All of this, we want to do it with the United States inside the international organization. So I think that on the substance, and it is the same for human rights. Look at European French statements on Xinjiang and the Uyghur communities and Hong Kong. We have to work together because we share the same views. So one of the things I find really important in this respect is to set, as democracies, the standards for the use of, you mentioned the surveillance activities and new technologies. It's really important for the future. And I want to draw your attention on one of the initiatives we took as France and Canada as two succeeding to 1 year after the other G7 presidency. We launched this global partnership on artificial intelligence to set the standards, which is linked to the OECD, to set the standards on the future uses of artificial intelligence. So again, we are really very, very, on the EU side, I think, very, very much keen to work with the US on all of these issues.
And there are some really promising initiatives in that connection, I think, Philippe. This idea of a D10 of democratic, T10 of democratic technologically advanced countries that work together on technology issues. I mean, as you mentioned, data standards in the emerging data-driven global economy, internet privacy standards, and I think if the United States and Japan and the EU work together and bring in other like-minded countries, India, Australia, the Canada, and so forth, that China can't take this divide and conquer approach. And so I'm optimistic about it. I think that after a few years, we might want to send some flowers to Xi Jinping for his aggressive actions in this period of time that I think has galvanized us and helped us recognize we have to work together. Philippe, you mentioned earlier the problem of jihadist terrorism and how it really spans the greater Middle East. Really, I would say from Morocco in the Far East across really into obviously Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I was really proud of the way that we worked together with the U.S. providing some enabling capabilities as France took the lead in Africa in the G5 Sahel. And I wondered if you might talk about how you see the risk from jihadist terrorist organizations now and what more we might do about it. I don't think it will surprise you to learn that I was quite disappointed with this announcement that we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan and adding insult to injury almost by September 11th, 2021, under the belief that our withdrawal will end the war. I think this is a profoundly narcissistic view and self-referential view of the jihadist terrorist problem, because actually these terrorist organizations, Philippe, of course, they do have agency of their own and a bit of authorship over the future themselves. What do we have to do, Philippe? Americans are getting tired of what many people are calling these endless wars. What is a sustainable approach to this problem? And how can we work together really across the free world to protect our citizens from those who use hatred and the murder of innocents as their principal approach in this war against all civilized people?
Now, of course, in this year where the US will commemorate the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, but also in a country, which is my country, where we have been suffering since in the last years, especially 2015, 2016, but still more recently, at the end of last year, we had 2 terrorist attacks on our territory, which killed people, a teacher on the streets near Paris, who was horribly murdered, and 3 Catholic faithful in a church in the southeastern France. So we see that the terrorist organizations we fight and also in Afghanistan, because ISIS and Al Qaeda are also in Afghanistan. We see that they are weaker, maybe because there is no more caliphate of ISIS, Daesh in Syria and Iraq. They have lost their territorial ground. But we see in many places, even all new places like the north of Mozambique in southeastern Africa, we see that those organizations try to come back and are still very, very active. Underground, they try to reconstitute their forces. They remain very active as propagandists on the social network, and so we have to act. One of the things we try to do is the initiative launched in 2019 by the New Zealand's Prime Minister and the French president, the so-called Christchurch call to action, is really to unite all international efforts to suppress terrorist contents on the internet, not only from jihadist threats, also from extreme right, alt-right, as it was the case in the Christchurch mosques attack sources. We want to suppress, as a community of nations, of democracies, including the tech business, to make a joint effort to delete and to prevent the circulation of terrorist contents and hatred speech. This is one thing we should do. But to come back to what you said and to what we are doing in Sahel with essential support, logistical, intelligence support by the US, and with more and more support by other European nations, we absolutely need to continue this effort against terrorist organizations because the fight is not over, obviously, and we have the duty to help those countries, especially in fragile zones and regions like Sahel. Those countries, what we call the G5s, they try to organize themselves to build multilateral forces to work together across their borders. and we must help them to build up their own capacities. We must help them financially, of course, but we must also help them politically and militarily. We are there in Sahel because they asked us to come. You know, in 2013, Mali was invaded by jihadist groups. We were about to take the whole country, and we came in 2013. France came, so it's a fight. We understand that the competition between big powers is and especially the consequences of the rise of power of China might be now what the US considers as the biggest challenge for its foreign security policy. But we must not forget the terrorist threat, which does exist, and which continues to exist.
Yeah, Philippe, I think we should have learned in December 2011, when we left Iraq and declared that war over, that wars don't end when one party disengages, right? These jihadist terrorists aren't looking around now in Afghanistan and say, well, the Americans are gone, I guess we'll just stop. And so I think it's important for us to have a sustained effort. And of course, the kind of burden sharing that we're doing with France, and I think especially, as you mentioned, with indigenous forces that we help enable, I think that allows us to keep our population safe at a relatively low cost. And I, for one, deeply appreciate what France is doing in the G5 Sahel. You know, I'd like to talk to you just about the Middle East in general, right, Philippe? You are a wise person, and France has been engaged, in the Middle East for a long time. A lot of Americans these days, they look at the Middle East and they see it as a mess to be avoided, right? And it does look like a mess, right? Lebanon, where France has a long relationship, is in free fall with the utter collapse of its economy after the corruption within its financial sector came to light amidst the COVID crisis, and of course that big explosion in Beirut almost just seemed to punctuate what is a disastrous situation there. The Syrian civil war continues, and of course that is really, I look at it as really a serial episodes of mass homicide and a humanitarian catastrophe there. Yemen, okay, I mean it looks terrible. What is the importance of the Middle East to Europe, to France, and what do you think a policy is that can address some of the maladies in the Middle East, with the understanding that, hey, the problems in the Middle East don't stay there, unfortunately, right? And so we have a humanitarian dimension, but also there's a very important security dimension to the Middle East broadly. What's your view? And maybe begin with Lebanon and just talk more broadly about the region.
Well, I can understand that for American citizens, this region seems very difficult to understand, but also very difficult to handle. There is, of course, a difference with the European Union. I think that you had also a conversation with one other among our former common colleagues and friends, Mariangela Zappia, our Italian colleague. I think she explained to you, and it's also very, very strongly felt in France. This region is our neighborhood. It's our neighborhood, and everything happening in Libya or in Lebanon or in Syria is, as you said, will come to us, and we have to consider these neighbors also as a big opportunity, basically, because the Mediterranean space is a space of civilization, of exchanges, and our deepest wish, especially the Mediterranean nations of the European Union, which are Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Malta. We have always tried, together with our other EU nations, to develop a project of peace, cooperation, stability, and security in the Mediterranean. It's absolutely essential, and we have launched a number of projects, and we will continue to do this. But if it has not worked as well as we would have wished, it's also because the problems of these regions are there. They are not new, and we have, to answer your questions, we have to continue to fight against the terrorism, which is what we said in the previous question, which is really important. And we have to fight for the rights of those peoples to be heard, and to fight, as we did together when we were NSA, on the basis of our principles, to close this terrible war in Syria. Of course, this is really we have to bring, in Libya, for instance, we have a window of opportunities now. We have a new government. We have elections, which should take place on December 24th in Libya. So we have to push all this positive agenda of stabilizations, but also to fight without compromise against the threats which are not only threats to our countries, which are first threats to those countries. The first victims of jihadist terrorism are Muslim citizens. Also, we have victims in our countries, but so those are the things we have to do, and not forgetting this project, this important project by the EU of creating with its neighbors, southern neighbors, southeastern neighbors, at one point, a common space of stability, of cooperation, which we will continue to work on this agenda, which is maybe a longer term agenda.
Well, thank you, Philippe. And if we were almost out of time, but there were two other questions I had, and I wonder if I might just lump them together and ask you to answer as quickly as you can. First of all, on these two agreements, I guess I'll link them between the two agreements, that President Macron was on the phone to President Trump quite a few times, and you and I had a number of conversations trying to convince President Trump to stay in the Iran nuclear deal, as well as the Paris Climate Agreement. Of course, President Trump was unpersuaded on both counts. But what are the prospects, you think, for our ability to work effectively on climate change and man-made carbon emissions as part of that? I saw the recent announcement that France is going to reduce maybe the percentage of its reliance on nuclear power, which has been a great strength, I think, for France in reducing carbon emissions. And then what do you think the prospects are for this Iran nuclear deal? Frankly, Philippe, it looks dead to me. I mean, we're trying to, the Biden administration is trying to bring it back to life, but I think it seems dead based on what Iran is doing, as well as what is happening with the impending sunset clauses and so forth. But could you comment on Iran and climate? And just, we'd love to hear your thoughts on both.
Well, on climate, with the US back to the Paris Climate Accord, the question now is how we can raise the ambition of all big greenhouse gas emitters to reach the objective of limiting the global warming, which is absolutely vital for all of us. Though it will be something which we'll do together with the US and with other partners. But I must stress that in spite of the position taken by the President Trump, many actors in the US, local governments, business communities, civil society, remain very active, pursuing the same goals. So we can draw on this very active partnership with many actors in the US, and now with the US as such, as government. So if we have reduced the share of nuclear energy in our electricity mix, or more precisely, if we want to reduce it from around 70% to 50% until 2035, it's because 50% remains really important. We fully remain committed to the role of civil nuclear energy, like the US, as carbon neutral energy inside our energy and electricity mix. But we want to reduce somewhat its share, to have a bigger share for renewable energies, but it remains really important. On Iran, I understand your observation, but on the other hand, we have no choice to do everything we can to prevent Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. It remains our goal, and our disagreement with President Trump consisted in the choice of instruments of policies to reach this goal. The second important goal, of course, is to secure more stability for the region, with which is not the result of Iranian policies in the region. You mentioned Lebanon. I would have loved to answer on Lebanon also, but also Yemen and so on. So we don't think that the policy which has been pursued in the last years has been successful in the US, at least by the US. We want, and we have always said, HR, because we had discussion on this, we agree that the JCPOA, as it has been signed in 2015, is not enough. You mentioned the sunset clause. You mentioned I mentioned regional activities. We need to do more, to have a stronger framework. But we have also, and first to come back to the compliance with the JCPOA, and Iran is not doing this at all, you're right. But you would see the European nations, together France, the UK and Germany, continuing to work as much as we can to restart these negotiations. Sorry, I have been a bit long, but thank you for these great questions.
Ambassador Philippe Etienne, what a tour de force. Merci. On behalf of the Hoover Institution, thank you so much for helping us learn more about Battlegrounds, important to building a future of peace and prosperity for generations to come. What a pleasure it has been to be back with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cha. See you soon, hopefully, in Stanford or in Washington. Bye.
Wow, thank you.
Battlegrounds is a production of the Hoover Institution, where we advance ideas that define a free society. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.